Seoul's skyline glimmered under the evening lights, the city alive with its usual chaotic beauty. Inside the opulent ballroom of the Grand Zenith Hotel, the elite of the city mingled like predators circling their prey. The air was thick with expensive perfume, sparkling champagne, and hushed whispers of deals and betrayals. Among them, one woman moved gracefully but unnoticed. Rembo, a stunning black waitress whose striking blue eyes and radiant smile could have stolen the spotlight from anyone. Yet tonight, she was just another server carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, trying her best to blend into the glittering crowd. Her heart raced as she navigated between the wealthy patrons, trying not to bump into anyone. She had been warned that tonight's clientele was different. These were not ordinary business people. These were people with power that could crush lives with a single word. She kept her head down, focusing on her work, and reminding herself that she had one goal tonight: make it through her shift without any disasters. Then it happened. A single misstep, a wobbling tray, and a crimson splash of wine arced through the air and landed squarely on the pristine white suit of Min-jun, the man whose name alone sent shivers through the city's underworld. He was infamous, a feared mafia boss whose ruthless reputation was matched only by his cold, calculating eyes. The room seemed to freeze. All conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned, eyes wide, as the beautiful waitress had just committed the most dangerous mistake of her life. Min-jun stared at her, his dark eyes narrowing. He looked down at the crimson stain spreading across his silk jacket and then back at her. The air between them seemed to thrum with electricity. He moved through the crowd with a predator's grace, the murmurs of the elite fading into silence as he approached her. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice was low, controlled, but it carried an unmistakable weight of threat. Rembo swallowed hard, her legs refusing to betray her fear. She had read about men like him, ruthless, violent, untouchable. Most women would have cowered, apologized profusely, and begged for forgiveness. But something in Min-jun's gaze intrigued her, a flicker of something that made her heart beat faster despite the danger. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, bowing slightly. But it wasn't enough. His eyes were like daggers, scanning her, measuring her, dissecting her every nerve. "You're sorry." His lips curved into a faint, cruel smile. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yes," she whispered. And then, against every instinct screaming at her to grovel, she added, "And I don't care." The room froze again. A gasp escaped from someone nearby. She had just insulted the most feared man in Seoul. And yet, Min-jun's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with curiosity. "You don't care." His voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for her, and it sent shivers down her spine. Most women would have collapsed on their knees, begging for mercy. Most women would have learned the cost of crossing me. But not you. Rembo's jaw tightened. "I've worked too hard to let fear run my life. You think you scare me? I've survived worse." The audacity, the defiance, it was intoxicating to him. He took a slow step closer, towering over her, the scent of his cologne sharp and dangerous. His gaze never left hers, piercing straight into her soul. The crowd waited in tense silence, anticipating her death. But Min-jun did something unexpected. He tilted his head, a cruel, playful glint in his eyes. "You've got spirit," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I like that, but spirit won't save you tonight. So, here's your choice." Rembo's pulse thundered in her ears. She had been trained by life to spot danger. And right now, danger was standing directly in front of her, radiating power that could crush her instantly. "You have two options," he continued, his dark eyes locked on hers. "Option 1. You bow, apologize properly, and I let someone else punish you instead. You may survive the night, but your pride dies here." Rembo's chest tightened, the words like poison in her ears. Pride was all she had left after surviving years of struggle. She wouldn't let it die so easily. "And option 2? She asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Option 2, his eyes darkened further, a dangerous glint lighting up his face. "Survive the night in my bed. Rembo. You do what I say, Stay alive until morning, and you walk free. The room erupted into shocked whispers. Every soul present knew exactly what he meant. He had never offered mercy to anyone, let alone in such a twisted game of power. And yet, here she stood, staring him down. Rembo's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to beg, to do whatever it took to escape this nightmare. But she couldn't. Something deep inside her, stubborn, defiant, alive, refused to bow. "You're insane," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "And I'm not scared of you." A slow, cruel smile spread across Min Jun's face. "I like that even more than I should." He leaned closer, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating off him. "Very well, Rembo. Tonight you survive my bed, or you die trying." And just like that, the crowd watched as he waved a hand, signaling two of his men. "Take her to the penthouse," he commanded. "Do not let her escape. Do exactly as I say." Rembo's stomach dropped. She was being escorted, surrounded by men twice her size. But even as her body tensed for a fight, her mind raced with plans. How to survive, how to stay alive, how to outsmart a man who had never been outsmarted in his life. The elevator ride was silent except for the soft mechanical hum and the sound of her own breathing. Min Jun's presence was suffocating, yet mesmerizing. She dared not look at him directly, afraid that doing so would give him the power to read her thoughts. When the elevator doors opened, she was led into the penthouse, a massive, luxurious space overlooking the neon-lit city. Min Jun closed the door behind them, and suddenly, it was just the two of them. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to choke on. "You have until dawn," he said, his voice low, a growl of warning. "Survive and I let you go. Fail and—" He didn't need to finish. She understood perfectly. Rembo's heart raced, adrenaline surging through her veins. She looked up at him, defiance in her eyes despite the terror gnawing at her. "I'll survive," she said, "but don't think I'll make it easy for you." Min Jun's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "I wouldn't have it any other way." And with that, the first move in a deadly, intoxicating game had begun. Outside the penthouse, the city carried on, unaware that inside, a storm of desire, danger, and defiance had just been unleashed. A storm that neither Rembo nor Min Jun could escape. The night had just begun. The doors of the penthouse closed with a final, echoing click, and suddenly, the world outside ceased to exist. Rembo found herself standing in a space she could never have imagined. Marble floors that gleamed like glass, walls adorned with modern art, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the sprawling neon jungle of Seoul. Every detail screamed power, wealth, and control, and she was now trapped in the center of it, under the watchful gaze of Min Jun. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Fear, anger, defiance, and something she refused to name. She had survived hardship before, but this was different. Min Jun wasn't just any man. He was a force of nature, a storm she had no idea how to weather. "You can sit," Min Jun said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a whip. He remained near the large glass doors, hands clasped behind his back, observing her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Or you can pace. It doesn't matter. You won't leave this room until sunrise." Rembo's eyes narrowed. "You really think locking me in here will scare me?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Her voice trembled slightly, but she refused to let him see it. Fear was a weakness she couldn't afford tonight. Min Jun stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, the air between them charged with something dangerous. He stopped just a few feet away, the subtle scent of his cologne hitting her like a wave. "I don't want to scare you," he said softly, almost conversationally. "I want to see if you can survive me." The words made her pause. Survive him? Could anyone survive a man like Min Jun? Every story she had ever heard about him ended in blood, betrayal, or fear. And yet, here she was, staring him down, her body trembling but her spirit refusing to bend. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice firmer this time. "You're not the first man who's tried to intimidate me." He smiled, a dangerous curve of his lips that sent shivers down her spine. Good. Most women break before they even open their mouths. You are different. For a moment, silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Rembo felt his gaze like a physical weight pressing against her, probing her thoughts, her fears, her secrets. She shifted slightly, trying to find some semblance of comfort in the luxurious room, but there was none. Every chair, every couch, every piece of furniture felt like part of a trap, symbols of a life she had never known, and a life that now held her captive. Minutes stretched into hours, each one heavier than the last. Rembo's initial defiance began to crack as the reality of her situation settled in. She was alone with a man who could destroy her with a single thought, a man who had made her life his plaything for the night. Her mind raced with plans. Run, hide, negotiate, fight. But every option seemed impossible. Min-jun watched her, unflinching, as if he could see every calculation behind her eyes. You're clever, he said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. Most would panic, cry, beg, you think, even under pressure. I like that. Rembo's jaw tightened. I'm not here to impress you. No, he said softly, almost teasing. You're here to survive. But impressing me is unavoidable. She felt her cheeks flush, not from anger, but from something she refused to acknowledge. Her pulse raced, a mix of fear and something else she couldn't name. She told herself to focus, to think, to stay sharp. Min-jun wasn't a man to underestimate, not even for a second. Hours passed in a tense standoff, neither moving, neither speaking much. Rembo tried to distract herself by exploring the room cautiously, noting the way the city lights reflected off the polished floors, the piano in the corner, the shadows that clung to the walls. Every corner seemed like it held secrets and maybe even a way to escape. But no, she realized the penthouse was as much a cage as it was a palace. Finally, Min-jun broke the silence. Do you sleep? He asked casually, though there was an edge to his tone that made her flinch. I haven't yet, she replied, wary. Why? Because you will, he said, moving toward the piano. He ran his fingers over the keys, producing a low, melancholic tune that filled the room. Rembo froze, startled by the vulnerability in his music. She had expected cruelty, coldness, or commands, but not this. Not the sound of a man who, despite his ruthless reputation, could express pain so beautifully. For a moment, she saw a different side of him, one that wasn't the feared Mafia boss of Seoul, one that was human, fragile, and broken. It startled her, even as it made her wary. Was this a trap? Was he testing her? Or was this a glimpse of the man behind the legend? She moved closer to the piano, unable to resist the pull of curiosity. You play beautifully, she said softly. Min-jun didn't look at her. Thank you, he murmured, almost to himself. Not many appreciate it. You don't seem like the type to care if people appreciate you, she said, her voice firmer than she expected. He finally looked at her, his dark eyes flashing with something she couldn't name. Surprise? Amusement? Maybe even admiration. You speak too much, he said, but there was no anger in his tone, only a quiet acknowledgement. I can't help it, she replied, shrugging. I talk to survive, and right now, I need to survive you. He let out a low chuckle, dark and dangerous, and stepped closer. The distance between them shrank, the tension thickening to an almost unbearable level. Rembo felt her chest tighten, her breath catching as she realized just how close he was. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to run, to scream, but another, stranger instinct held her in place. Min-jun tilted his head, his gaze assessing, and for the first time, Rembo felt a flicker of vulnerability in him. A hint that behind the ruthless exterior, there was something human, but she couldn't let herself get too close. Not tonight. Survival was her only goal. Hours blurred as the night deepened. They spoke in measured words, teasing, testing, and challenging each other. Every glance, every word, every movement was a battle, a dangerous dance of dominance and defiance. Rembo felt her mind sharpen, her instincts heighten. She realized that surviving Min-jun wasn't just about endurance. It was about strategy, about reading the man in front of her, understanding him without letting him understand her. Finally, as the first hints of dawn crept through the massive windows, painting the city in shades of gold and pink, Rembo realized something astonishing. She had survived. She was still alive. She was still standing. And somehow, she was still in Min Jun's presence, without yielding, without surrendering. Min Jun, for his part, leaned against the piano, arms crossed, watching her. "You've done well," he said quietly, almost reluctantly. "Most wouldn't have made it this far." Rembo met his gaze, her own eyes steady despite the exhaustion coursing through her body. "I told you," she said softly, a small, defiant smile touching her lips. "I survive. That's what I do." He studied her for a long moment, then finally allowed a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Perhaps," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "You are unlike anyone I've ever met." And in that moment, the air between them shifted. The night had been a battlefield, a test of wills and courage, and against all odds, Rembo had endured. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Perhaps danger, perhaps chaos. But for now, she had won her first round. As the sun began to rise over Seoul, casting its first light across the penthouse, Rembo realized something profound. She wasn't just surviving Min Jun. She was changing him, too. And neither of them would ever be the same again. After surviving the night, Rembo thought she might finally catch a breath. But in the days that followed, she realized survival was only the beginning. Min Jun did not forget. He could not forget. She had entered his life like a storm, bold, unyielding, alive. And now his every thought seemed consumed by her defiance, her audacity, and the way her presence unervingly chipped at his carefully constructed walls. Started small. She noticed his black car parked discreetly outside the restaurant where she worked. At first, she thought it was coincidence, a chance alignment of traffic patterns or city patrols. But the subtle, sharp glint of the car window reflecting her own gaze made her heart skip, and she knew it wasn't chance. One evening, while carrying a tray of glasses across the crowded restaurant floor, she saw him sitting at the corner table, half hidden by the shadows, his dark eyes locked on her like a predator tracking its prey. Her stomach twisted into knots, a mixture of fear, frustration, and an undeniable thrill. "You're everywhere," she muttered under her breath, carefully keeping her voice low. A waitress nearby frowned. "Who are you talking to?" Rembo waved her off, forcing her face into a mask of composure. "No one." But it wasn't true. Min Jun was everywhere. At her apartment, paying her rent anonymously, sending gifts that appeared on her doorstep without a note, as if saying, "I see you, and I will not let you forget it." She hated him for it. She hated that she hated him. And yet, every time she caught a glimpse of his tailored suits, the glint of his dark eyes, or the briefest shadow of a smile, her heart betrayed her. It fluttered in her chest, loud enough to drown out reason, and she hated herself for noticing. Her friends noticed too. "Rembo?" one of them said, her voice tinged with worry. "You can't ignore it. That man is dangerous. He's a mafia boss. People like him, they don't stop. They don't play fair. You have to be careful." "I'm careful," Rembo replied. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure if she believed herself. Danger, it seemed, had a way of wrapping itself around her, and Min Jun had become the embodiment of that danger. He appeared at her restaurant without warning, sitting silently at the bar, drinking black coffee while observing her. His presence was overwhelming, a weight that pressed against her senses. She hated the way her pulse raced, hated how her hands trembled slightly when she poured a drink and he caught her gaze. One evening, he arrived in a different way. She found an envelope slipped under her apartment door, heavy with the weight of intent. Inside was a sleek black card and a single sentence in his unmistakable handwriting. "I like to see you safe. Always." Her stomach churned. She didn't know whether to be furious, terrified, or strangely comforted. The card was both a threat and a promise, a declaration of control wrapped in an enigma. She tried to ignore it, but her mind betrayed her. She imagined him watching, waiting, analyzing every action. It was impossible to focus on anything else. Even when she tried to sleep, she saw the shadow of his presence in her dreams, a dark silhouette leaning against the edge of her consciousness, reminding her that she was never alone, never free. At work, his obsession became more apparent. Min-jun began orchestrating subtle interventions in her life. He paid off debts she didn't even know she had, arranged for bills to be quietly settled, and made sure her apartment was protected without her asking. It was infuriating. He didn't ask, didn't consult, just acted as though he owned a piece of her existence. "You're smothering me," she hissed when she discovered that he had sent someone to fix a leak in her ceiling, despite her protests. Min-jun leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable, arms crossed. "I'm not smothering you. I'm protecting you. And you have a way of attracting danger. You survived one night, but I cannot risk the rest of your life being threatened." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't need protection. I can take care of myself." He stepped closer, his voice dropping, dangerous and intimate. "Perhaps, but I don't want to find out if that's true the hard way." Rembo clenched her fists, a mix of frustration and something she couldn't name curling in her chest. He didn't understand it was never about danger alone. She thrived in danger. She had survived worse than him. The real challenge was controlling the pull he had over her. The way her mind betrayed her with every glance, every proximity, every word. And Min-jun noticed. He watched her carefully, studying the way she moved, the subtle expressions that betrayed her feelings. He could see her resistance, and he admired it, even as it fueled his obsession. Most women would have fallen, cowered, or begged for mercy. Not Rembo. She defied him at every turn, and it was intoxicating. One rainy evening, he appeared at her apartment without warning. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. She hesitated before opening the door, expecting a delivery or perhaps a neighbor. But when she opened it, there he stood, drenched from the rain, his dark hair plastered against his forehead, eyes blazing with an intensity that made her knees weak. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "I told you," he said, stepping inside before she could react. "I don't ask permission to keep someone alive." Her pulse thundered. She wanted to be angry, wanted to throw him out, wanted to scream, but she didn't. She couldn't. There was something magnetic about him, a force she had no power to resist. "I don't need you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "No," he admitted, his voice low and rough. "But you don't get to decide that. Not when the world is filled with people who would hurt you without hesitation." They stood there, the rain pouring outside, the room filled with tension that could cut through steel. Rembo realized, with a sinking feeling, that her defiance had not only survived the night, it had made him obsessed. He could not look away, could not forget her, could not rest until he had ensured her safety in every possible way. She hated that he had this power over her. She hated the way her heart raced when he leaned in, the way her mind betrayed her with fleeting thoughts of him, the way her body reacted even when she tried to resist. And yet, she could not deny it. Days turned into nights, and nights into days, with Min-jun's presence a constant shadow in her life. Gifts arrived, small and silent. A scarf left at her door, a bouquet of white lilies with no note, a black car always parked at a discreet distance when she left work. He was everywhere, always watching, always anticipating, always reminding her that he had claimed a place in her life she could not escape. And through it all, Rembo remained defiant. She met every gesture with resistance, every intrusion with clever retorts, every attempt to control her with unwavering independence. And Min-jun, instead of being frustrated, became even more captivated. Her fire, her courage, her unwillingness to yield. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered. One evening, as she closed the restaurant, she found him waiting outside, leaning casually against his car, umbrella in hand despite the fact it had stopped raining. She froze. "You really don't understand," he said softly, almost a whisper meant only for her. "I can't leave you alone. Not for a second. Not when there are people who would see you harmed." Rembo's heart clenched, a mixture of fear and something she refused to name. "And you think this obsession of yours will make me safe?" she asked, her voice tight. I don't think, he replied, eyes dark and unreadable. I know. And as she watched him walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the night, she realized something that terrified her as much as it exhilarated her. She didn't want him to stop. She didn't want him to leave. Somehow, despite her resistance, despite her fear, she wanted the very thing she had sworn she would never need, Min-jun. And Min-jun, in turn, was caught in a spiral he could not escape. No woman had ever challenged him like Rembo. No woman had ever stirred him, provoked him, haunted his thoughts. And now she was everywhere, inside his mind, his heart, and even in the spaces between his ruthless calculations. He didn't understand why she had survived the night, but he knew one thing for certain. He could never survive without her. The sun had barely risen over Seoul when Rembo received the first message that made her blood run cold. It was from Hannah, her best friend since childhood, a woman who had seen her through every hardship and every heartbreak. Hannah didn't sugarcoat things, and her text reflected that blunt honesty. Rembo, you're in danger. That man, Min-jun, he's not just dangerous, he's poison. The police are investigating him for murders and drug trafficking. You need to stay away. Now. Rembo stared at the message, her fingers tightening around her phone. She knew Hannah was right. Min-jun was a feared mafia boss whose name was whispered in fear across the city. Every story she had ever heard about him ended with someone dead, disappeared, or broken beyond repair. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Couldn't stop feeling that strange pull whenever his black car appeared outside her apartment or the restaurant. She shoved the phone into her bag and tried to focus on her shift. But her heart raced with every shadow, every honk of a distant horn, every flicker of movement near the windows. She had survived one night with him, but survival was not the same as safety. Not by a long shot. Her fears were confirmed that very evening. Rembo was carrying a tray of steaming dumplings to a table when the first warning signs appeared. A group of men, rough-looking and aggressive, pushed their way into the restaurant. Their eyes scanned the room like predators, stopping only when they spotted her. Hey, you! One of them barked, pointing at her. You're coming with us. Panic surged through her veins. Her hands trembled as she tried to keep her balance and not spill the food. The restaurant erupted into chaos as patrons screamed and scrambled. Waiters tried to intervene, but the men shoved them aside with frightening ease. And then he was there. Min-jun arrived like a shadow stepping out of darkness. The black car screeched to a stop outside, and he appeared in the doorway of the restaurant, calm, precise, and terrifying. His presence alone made the intruders hesitate. The air seemed to thicken as he approached, each step deliberate, each motion radiating lethal power. Back off, he said, his voice low and deadly, like a coiled whip ready to snap. The men laughed nervously, trying to maintain bravado, but it was futile. Min-jun's eyes, dark and piercing, scanned them with a predator's focus. I said back off, he repeated, this time his tone snapping like lightning. Within moments, chaos turned into carnage. Min-jun moved with inhuman speed and precision, disarming, intimidating, and incapacitating the intruders without even drawing a weapon. Rembo watched, frozen in awe and terror, as the man she had survived the night with displayed a level of control and power she had never imagined. When the men finally fled, nursing bruises and broken pride, Min-jun turned to her, his expression unreadable. You're alive, he said simply. No relief, no satisfaction. Just the matter-of-fact statement that had haunted her dreams since that night. She began, but words failed her. You owe me, he finished for her, his gaze cold and unyielding. Your life is mine to claim tonight. Remember that. Rembo felt a shiver run down her spine. She hated the way his presence wrapped around her like a cage, hated the way fear and desire tangled in her chest. But she couldn't deny the truth. He had saved her life, and in doing so had taken a piece of her freedom. Later that evening, back in her apartment, Hannah's warnings came rushing back. Rembo sat on her bed, trembling despite her exhaustion. She thought about the attack, the way Min-jun had appeared like a phantom, and the undeniable pull he held over her. You're being reckless, she muttered to herself, frustration and fear mingling in her voice. You can't keep letting him interfere in your life. He's dangerous. You could die. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, no words, just a picture of the restaurant, the same scene she had witnessed, taken from an angle only someone watching from a distance could capture. And beneath it, in Min Jun's handwriting, I will always find you. Rembo's breath caught. Fear clawed at her chest, but so did something else. A strange, intoxicating thrill she could not name. She hated that he had this power over her. Hated that her heart betrayed her every time she thought of him. Hated that part of her wanted him to watch, to protect, to dominate. The days that followed were a tense dance of proximity and avoidance. Min Jun did not leave her alone. He appeared at the restaurant, always observing, always silent, a shadow that followed her movements. She tried to maintain distance, to act indifferent, but he could read her too well. Every glance she stole, every nervous movement, every whispered word, he noticed. And he smiled at it, darkly, dangerously, like a man who had already won a battle he hadn't yet fought. Then came the phone call that would change everything. Rembo. Min Jun's voice was low, controlled, and impossible to ignore. Meet me. Now. No excuses. Her stomach churned, fear and anticipation warring inside her. She didn't want to go, didn't want to submit to his command, didn't want to admit the truth she had long denied. That she was drawn to him, that part of her wanted him, that part of her feared him more than anyone else alive. But survival, she realized, sometimes meant obedience, if only for the moment. When she arrived, she found him waiting in the shadows of an alley near her apartment, tall, imposing, and impossibly calm. His presence filled the narrow space, suffocating and magnetic all at once. You need to understand something, he said without preamble, his eyes boring into hers. You are walking a dangerous line. Every move you make could bring harm, not just to you, but to anyone who cares for you. I understand, she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. But I can take care of myself. He chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. You're clever, but cleverness isn't enough. The world I live in doesn't forgive mistakes. And you're already involved. Rembo's jaw tightened. I don't belong in your world, she said firmly. I survive in my own. Min Jun stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And yet you survive with me. That is the difference. You will never be free from me completely. Not now, not ever. But that doesn't mean you can't survive. She felt a thrill run through her body, a mixture of fear, anger, and something else she refused to name. She hated him for the power he held over her, hated that her heart raced in his presence, hated that she wanted him more than she should. And he noticed. Of course he noticed. You're hiding something, he said, his voice low and commanding, his eyes dark and unyielding. Fear, desire, both, and I can see it. I am not afraid of you, she said, though her voice betrayed her slightly. You are, he replied softly, leaning closer, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating off his body. But that fear, it's what makes you alive. It's what makes you irresistible. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time since that fateful night, she wondered if survival was even possible. Could she withstand this obsession, this dangerous pull, this man who seemed determined to consume every part of her life without asking permission? Min Jun didn't answer. He didn't need to. His presence, his gaze, his dark, commanding aura said enough. The night ended with him walking away, disappearing into the shadows as silently as he had arrived, leaving Rembo trembling and conflicted, aware of the danger surrounding her, yet unable to deny the strange thrill his obsession brought. As she locked her apartment door and leaned against it, she whispered to herself, he's dangerous, poison. I shouldn't want this, but I can't stop thinking about him. And somewhere in the darkness of soul, Min Jun's black car waited, watching, patient, and relentless, as he calculated his next move. He would protect her, dominate her, and claim her in ways she didn't yet understand. And she, whether she wanted it or not, was already his obsession. The moment Min Jun arrived at her apartment that evening, Rembo knew things were about to escalate. The rain had fallen in torrents, leaving slick streets and the faint scent of wet asphalt hanging in the air. He stood there, tall, drenched, and immovable, a storm of control and dominance incarnate. His dark eyes held the same intensity as always, but tonight there was an added layer: determination. "You need to come with me," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "For your own protection." Rembo's chest tightened. She hated this. She hated how calm he made everything seem, how absolute his authority was, how impossible it was to resist him. She had survived countless hardships, faced dangers most people wouldn't dare imagine. But now, Minjun was asking her to surrender, to step into a life that was both luxurious and suffocating, a gilded cage she could never escape. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "I can handle myself. I don't need your protection." He raised an eyebrow, the hint of a smirk curving his lips. "You think that, but you've already seen what happens when danger finds you. Do you really want to test fate again?" Rembo's fingers curled into fists at her sides. He was right, and that was the part that made her furious. She hated being right. She hated that she could see through his words, that she could feel the truth pressing against her like a physical force. And yet, she refused to give him the satisfaction of surrender. "I don't belong in your world," she said, staring at him with as much defiance as she could muster. "I survive in my own, and I don't need you or your world to do it." Minjun's eyes darkened, a storm behind them that mirrored the brewing rain outside. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until she could feel the heat radiating off his body. "You belong wherever I decide you belong," he said, low and commanding. "And right now, that's with me." Her heart pounded violently in her chest. She hated him for the way his words made her feel, hated the way she wanted to argue yet knew she couldn't. He wasn't just a man. He was a force, a shadow she couldn't escape, a storm she couldn't outrun. Before she could protest further, his hand shot out, gripping her elbow with surprising strength, and he led her through the rain-soaked streets to his black car. She tried to pull away, but the grip was firm, unyielding, and terrifyingly intimate. Every step felt like a surrender she had not intended to make. Yet there was no choice. The ride to his mansion was silent, the tension inside the sleek car almost unbearable. Rembo stared out the window, watching the city blur past, her mind racing. She hated the opulence, the control, the undeniable sense of being trapped, but she couldn't deny the pull, the strange, intoxicating thrill of being so close to a man who exuded danger and power. When they arrived, the mansion loomed like a fortress, a palace carved from marble and steel, its lights glowing ominously in the night. Minjun led her inside without a word, the security systems engaging automatically at his command. She felt trapped immediately, the weight of his dominance pressing down on her. "This is excessive," she muttered, scanning the grandeur around her. "I don't need." "You need this," he interrupted, his voice sharp but calm. "You need safety. And whether you like it or not, I am the only one who can provide it." Rembo glared at him, but there was no arguing with the absolute certainty in his tone. She hated it, hated the way his presence filled the room, the way every inch of the mansion seemed to reflect his control, his power, his unyielding dominance. And yet, she couldn't deny it. Part of her was curious. Part of her wanted to see the man behind the ruthless exterior, the man who had saved her life, the man who haunted her thoughts day and night. Minjun handed her the keys to a private suite in the mansion, a luxurious space with a king-sized bed, marble bathroom, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She felt a pang of resistance, hating how comfortable it all was, hating how much it tempted her to stay despite everything. "You will stay here," he said, his eyes dark and unwavering. "No exceptions. You are under my protection. And until sunrise, you will remain in this room." Rembo's chest tightened. "I don't belong here," she said, though the words felt weaker than before. "You belong wherever I decide," he repeated, echoing his earlier words. "And right now, that's here." The first night in the mansion was torture. Every sound, the faint hum of the city, the soft click of the security system, the whisper of the wind outside, kept her on edge. She lay in the enormous bed, fully clothed, eyes wide, ears straining for any sign of danger. Min-jun did not enter the room, did not touch her, but she felt his presence everywhere, a shadow lurking at the edges of her consciousness. Hours passed in tense silence. Her mind raced with strategies, plans of escape, ways to outsmart a man who seemed impossible to outsmart. But with every passing minute, a strange realization gnawed at her. She did not want to escape. Not completely, because Min-jun was fascinating, dangerous, and impossibly captivating. Every word he had spoken, every glance he had thrown, every subtle movement he had made had pulled her in ways she refused to name. Fear mingled with curiosity, resistance with desire, and she felt herself unraveling in ways she didn't fully understand. When she finally drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, she was startled awake by a sound. A soft, deliberate knock on the door. She froze, heart racing, her mind instantly calculating the possibilities. "Come in," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. Min-jun entered, standing in the doorway like a shadow carved from midnight. His eyes studied her, taking in every detail of her posture, every tremor of her fingers, every flicker of emotion in her gaze. "You're awake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Yes," she replied, trying to sound confident. "And I intend to stay that way." He stepped closer, the air between them charged, his presence overwhelming. "Good," he said softly, "because this is only the beginning. You will remain under my protection. You will stay here, and you will learn survival isn't just about endurance. It's about understanding who controls the game." Rembo's pulse thundered in her chest. She hated the truth of his words, hated the power he held over her, hated the way her body reacted to his presence despite every instinct screaming for resistance. But she could not deny it. Not anymore. The next days blurred into a strange rhythm of tension, danger, and intoxicating chemistry. She remained in the mansion, enduring his strict rules, resisting his subtle provocations, yet finding herself drawn to him more than she cared to admit. He would watch her as she moved through the suite, his gaze intense, penetrating, impossible to ignore. She caught him staring more than once, dark eyes following her every step, as if memorizing the curve of her jaw, the strength in her hands, the fire in her gaze. One evening, she teased him openly, calling him Mr. Iceheart, as she poured herself a glass of water, hoping to provoke some reaction. Min-jun's dark eyes flicked to her, and for the first time, a small smirk touched his lips. "You talk too much," he said, his tone sharp, yet there was something in it that told her he was enjoying the game. "I can't help it," she replied, her voice laced with defiance. "Someone has to keep you entertained." He didn't respond, only stared, and the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension, the kind that made her pulse race and her mind reel. By the end of the week, she realized something terrifying and exhilarating. She was no longer just surviving Min-jun. She was changing him, too. He wasn't just a dangerous mafia boss. He was a man capable of fascination, obsession, and even of vulnerability, though he would never admit it. And she was at the center of it all. And in that realization, Rembo understood the truth she had been trying to deny. She was no longer merely surviving. She was playing the game. And in this game, Min-jun was as much a prisoner of desire and obsession as she was.
Hello besties, stay tuned for episode 2. It drops tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe and share.